I've taught high school Earth and space science for many years, and the number one complaint I get from my students when we start talking about the constellations is, I've never been able to see those. All I see are dots. Well, if that's you, if you've never been able to see the constellations, then you're in the right place. Today I'm going to be revealing my patented secret for seeing the constellations. I'm Mr. Wilson. Welcome to class. So in order to be able to explain the secret of seeing the constellations, we need some tools to help us out. We're going to be creating a little device called a planisphere. I've included links to these printable assets in the description, so go ahead and download them, and we'll do a little art and craft activity here today. So what a planisphere is it is a device that allows you to see what constellations and stars are visible from your location at any given time of year and at any given time of the evening. So I'm going to teach you how this works first. Then we're going to use that device to help us see some of the constellations. So our other activity sheet here is just a portion of the sky. You'll see just the blank dots. You'll notice that this is black stars on a white piece of paper. This is the exact opposite of what we see in the actual night sky. Now I find that if I can see the constellations in negative like this, that it's actually a lot easier to see the real constellations, the white stars, against the black sky. So if you can see them here at the end of this tutorial, then it'll be even easier to see them in the night sky. So let's start by creating our planisphere. So to create this little device, you'll need the two printouts from the link in the description. One is the star chart itself, and then the other one is the little frame that we're going to be inserting it into. We're going to start by cutting out the frame. Next, we're going to cut out the stars. Now we need to cut out this little window area. All right, we've got all of our pieces. Let's start putting them together. We're going to start by folding this along that horizontal line. You'll see there's a little circle right in the very middle. That corresponds with our North Star. And on the back flap of the piece that we folded over here, there is a corresponding circle right there. We want to line those two circles out. And then if you've got one, you can use one of those little brass brads and poke it through so that it stays put. I unfortunately don't have one of those brads right now. So now that we've built our planisphere, how exactly does it work? You can see that there are months and dates all along the disk's outer edge, and on the frame's outer edge are times. So what you want to do is you want to line up the current time with whatever date it is. So today is October 20th, so here is October and 20th, and I'm going to line that up with the current time. It's currently about 10 p.m., so I'm just going to rotate the disk. If you had the brad in here, it wouldn't be so flimsy, but I don't have any of those brads, so I'm just going to hold it together here. I'm going to line up October 20th with 10 p.m. Now what we're looking at, these are the stars and constellations that should be visible in the night sky. Now you'll also notice that there are cardinal directions on the edge of the window here: north, west, east, and south. So for me, that direction is north. So if I hold this and point the north toward the actual north here, I can see that on my left would be the west. But wait a second, that says east. So why are the east and west mirrored? The answer is, when you're using this, you're not supposed to hold it down and look at the stars like this. You're supposed to hold it up to the sky and look at the stars like that. So if I pointed this toward the sky and pointed the north cardinal direction toward the actual north, the stars would be forming a dome over my head. So you can kind of envision this as being a dome like this and kind of a dome like that. So if I were holding it toward the sky, then where it says west, that actually is pointing toward the west. And where it says east, it's pointing toward the east. But if you're holding it down like this, then it looks like they're flipped. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get our blank star chart. And there's two of them in this package. There's one that's labeled south on the bottom, and there's one that's labeled north on the bottom. We can start with whichever one you want. I'll go ahead and start with the north because I think it's a little bit easier to start with. All right, so we've got our current date lined up with the current time, and we're going to be looking in the northern part of the sky. So that's just going to be like this area of the sky. If we were looking up here, we'd be looking in the south. If we're looking over here, we'd be looking in the east. So we're going to be looking in the northern part of the sky. So just the stars in like this region. So we're going to make sure that on our blank star chart that we're also looking at the north. You see that here on the bottom of the page. On the top of the page, you see all of the constellations that are available in this star field. Now I'm going to give you the first constellation because once you've got the first one, you can use that to point you to all of the other ones. The first constellation we're going to use is the Big Dipper. Just about everyone I've ever met knows how to find the Big Dipper. So we're going to start by lining up that one here. Here's the Big Dipper. All right, there's our Big Dipper. We're going to use that to point us to all of the other constellations. So here we can find the Big Dipper on our planisphere is right here at the very bottom of the chart. And you can see how the bucket is kind of pointed in this direction and the tail is pointed off in this direction. So we want to make sure that our star chart here is oriented the same way. So I'm going to rotate my stars so that the bucket is facing the same direction. Here you see the bucket on the Big Dipper right here is now pointed in the same direction as on my blank star chart. So as I look at my star chart here, if I were to draw an imaginary line between these two stars of the Big Dipper's bucket and just move in a straight line like this, that'll point me right to the North Star. So if I try and do the same thing with my star chart here and draw an imaginary straight line between those two stars on my Big Dipper, it'll point me right to the North Star right there. So now that I know where the North Star is, I can see that the North Star is part of another constellation, the Little Dipper, which is actually called Ursa Minor. So here you can see, I should see coming down from the North Star is another tail that connects to a small little bucket right here. Let's see if we see the same thing in the same orientation. It should be coming down and to the left. So here I see coming down and to the left, there's that little tail of the Big Dipper. Let's go ahead and connect those dots. Try and do this where my hand's not in the camera. Kind of awkward to draw like this, but whatever, we'll make it work. All right, so down and to the left is the tail, and it connects to the bucket of that Little Dipper right there, Ursa Minor. What we can do now that we've got two of these, we can continue jumping around to other ones, seeing if we can make other connections. Can we draw lines, imaginary lines between two stars to point us to another one? So for example, I could say, hey look, if I draw an imaginary straight line between these two bright stars on the Little Dipper, they'll point me toward this star right here, which is part of the constellation Draco. For example, when I drew the straight line between the two stars in the Big Dipper to get to the North Star, about 1/3 of the way there, I had to pass the first star in the constellation Draco. Let's see if we see something like that in our blank star chart. Here, as I was drawing the imaginary line between these two stars to get myself to the pole star, about 1/3 of the way there, I passed the first star in the constellation Draco. So right there's my first star. So using stars to point you to other stars is the secret to making this work. But if there is a secondary secret, it's to not try to see the entire constellation all at once. Eventually, with practice, you'll get there. But when you're first learning, what you really want to do is focus on just what's the next star in the connection. So for example, if I know my first star is here, then where's the next star? Let's look at our chart. according to our chart, our next star should be directly to the left of that one. So do I see another star directly to the left of that one? Yes, right there. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a connection just between those two and then stop. We want to find out where the third star is. So let's look at our chart. Here's our second star. Our third star should be to the left about twice the distance of that first connection and down a little bit. So let's see if we see that. We're going to go about twice the distance we did before. So if I were to measure that, if I go that distance and then that distance again, that puts me at about right here. And I want to go down a little bit from there as well. And here's another star. Here's two stars, in fact. Which one should I choose? So the way this chart works is the more bold the star is, the brighter the star is. And so here I see a brighter one and a fainter one. You should always choose the brighter if you have two to choose from. So here I'm going to make the connection there. Now I've got my third star. Where's my fourth star at? So here's my third star. My fourth star is pretty much, if I go to the left, about that same distance I just moved. So about that same distance again, and a little bit up from there. So let's see if we can do that. We're going to move the same distance we did before. So that's going to put me out around here someplace and up a little bit. So there's my next star. And I'm just going to continue winding my way around using that technique. Where's the next one? It's up about half the distance I just traveled. To the left and up about half the distance I just traveled. So here, if I traveled this distance, I'm only going to travel about half of that distance this time and go up. So here, if I go half the distance and up, there's my next star. This is how you do this. You use stars to point you to other stars, and then you measure how far you're moving and whether you need to move to the left and up, or to the left and down, or to the right and up, and you just measure those distances. If you focus on just connecting one star at a time, you'll be able to connect them all together. Once you find all of the stars in the list here, you can go ahead and start on the south side. And like I said, it's always easier if you have one to start with. So let's flip this over to the south side, and I'll give you your first constellation for the southern sky. Now, one thing you'll notice, when I was showing you how to orient your chart here, I used the current date and time, but that's for what my sky looks like tonight. But if you'll notice at the top of the chart, it tells you that these stars are visible during August and September. So what you're really going to want to do is, in order to be able to see all the constellations on the blank chart, you're going to want to orient somewhere between August and September to the evening. So let's say about 10 p.m. and I'm just going to rotate like right between August, so August 31st. I want to put that at about the 10 p.m. mark, and that should pretty well get me right in the middle of where my blank stars are at. So the first one I'm going to give you is right here. It's Cygnus, the swan. And on our chart, in order to get this to line up or orient the same way as our chart, you need to actually turn this upside down. So I'm going to hold the chart upside down for this one. And Cygnus, you can see, kind of has this cross shape here, and that corresponds to right here. So if we're holding our chart upside down, we can see that cross shape looks like this. There we go. So I want to make sure that my swan is facing the same direction on the stars that I'm looking at. And you can see that Cygnus has like this little extra little arms that come off, and you can see those extra little arms are right here like that. So now that you have this first one, you can use these stars to point you to other ones. So here, if I drew an imaginary line between these two stars in Cygnus, I could see that if I travel about that same distance again, in that direction, I'm going to pass right by the first star in Aquila's arm here. So let's see if we can see that on our chart. If I draw an imaginary line between these two stars, about that same distance again, so if you were to measure that and go that same distance again. Almost a straight line. We're a little bit up from there. You're going to see the first set of stars in Aquila here. So here is Aquila, and you can see that it's got like this diamond shape, and there's a little group of stars right here at the head. So we're going to create that little diamond-shaped pattern here with that little group of stars in the head. Once you have the diamond shape here, then you can see that it's got a little bit of a tail that comes off of it as well. So here's our little diamond shape, and if I continue in that same direction, we see we've got a little tail right there. If you really look closely here, you can see Aquila has its little tail. There's a star there, but then there's another little one right next to it. So it's got a little bit of a bend in his tail right there. So if I look at the stars that I drew here, I see that I don't have another star to do that little bend. As a matter of fact, if you look really closely at this, you'll see that if you were to draw your little imaginary line between that head and this and continue moving in a straight line, you actually need to come up a little bit from there. So here, if I were to draw an imaginary straight line between these two and continue in this direction, you can see instead of going up, I actually went down. So I did completely the wrong one. I recommend you do this activity with a pencil. So let's erase that line that I drew the wrong tail. So here's my imaginary line that's moving in this direction, and I need to move a little bit up from there to find two stars that are close together. Those are the two stars that make the bend in my tail. So this is actually where I want to go right there. So we're going a straight line from here would get me off in this direction, but I actually need to go up a little bit from there. So here, straight line and a little bit up from there to get to my two stars that make the bend. So that is the correct way to draw Aquila here. Now that you've gotten these ones nailed down, you can use them to hop you to other stars as well. So for example, maybe we use these two stars in Aquila and just draw an imaginary straight line in this direction, and that will pass us close to this first star in Capricorn. So for example, if I were to go in a straight line like this, you'd see that I'd pass this first star in Capricorn. So you can make up your own little connections. Like maybe if I was going in this direction, so remember I drew a straight line between these two, maybe I continue moving in a straight line and it gets me right till the Phineas right here. Here we go, we can do that here. If I draw a straight line between these two stars and continue moving in this direction, it's going to point me right past the little constellation of Delphinius right here. So there you go. Now you know my secret to seeing the constellations. Just draw imaginary straight lines between two stars to point you to other stars. Measure that distance and then use that distance as a gauge to how far you need to go to get to the next star. Now once you get a little bit of practice with the connect the dots in your little planisphere, take it out into the actual night sky and see if you can see the real stars. Leave a comment to let me know how you do with it. It does take a little bit of practice, but I think if you connect all those dots on the paper, I think you'll actually be able to see some stuff in the night sky. When you're comfortable with this, upgrade to an app on your phone. The app on your phone is amazing because as you move the phone, it'll actually move with you and help you get zeroed in a little bit better on the sky. Now, I find that with mine, sometimes it can be a little bit off. That's why I actually do kind of recommend the old-fashioned paper. I learned with one of these long before there were cell phones and apps. There was these little guys, and this is what I learned on, and I guarantee you, if you learn on old school, then technology will just make it even that much easier. So be sure to leave me some comments to let me know how you're doing with this. I love to hear stories about how people can see constellations for the first time. Even if it's just a few constellations, it still can be pretty exciting. So thanks for watching. Clear skies.